Hey YouTube, what if you could have only 5 specific bushcraft or camping tools for the rest of your life? Which ones would you bet the rest of your life on? What 5 would you choose? How would you even decide? In 5 to Survive, we ask experts what tools they would choose. We pick their brains about why and give you 5 things to consider adding to your gear. We also learn a little about the skills you need to use those tools. Whether you learn something or just enjoy listening to outdoor geeks talking about their gear, please subscribe and hit the notification button. We also have a companion podcast that includes all of the discussion in the YouTube episodes, but it includes more in-depth discussion with the experts, the why behind their what of their choices, and some laughs. I'm Joe Bassett, this is Valiant Outfitters, and you're about to discover 5 to Survive. In this episode of 5 to Survive, we'll ask Brian Leggat about cutting tools, knives, axes, saws. Brian is the founder of the Bushcraft Survival Academy in the UK. He's written a fantastic buyer's guide for bushcraft knives, so he's the perfect guy to ask what cutting tools he would choose if he could have only 5 for the rest of his life. And hey, he's got a great accent, so he's got that going for him. Well, hey, Brian, welcome to Valiant Outfitters and our 5 to Survive. There really aren't words for me to describe how excited I am that you're our very first guest here for our 5 to Survive. Your best bushcraft knife buyer's guide is fantastic. Thanks for writing it. I've recommended it for all of our bushcraft and camping students. It's good to have you with us.
Fantastic. Really pleased to be here. Thanks, Joe. And I really hope people get value out of that guide. That's why I've written it.
Oh, I know that some already have. Before we get into the 5 to Survive, I'd like to talk a little bit about your passion for bushcraft survival. By the way, I really love your tagline, be curious, not bored. Where did that come from?
Oh, okay. There's a story behind that. So in the UK, back in the 80s, I think it was, there was a TV show on a Saturday morning, a children's TV show called Tis Was. And part of the music on that was get out from in front of your TV and go and do something less boring instead. And I guess that's always stuck with me. Alongside, in my 30s, I unfortunately ended up getting divorced and moved into a house where I didn't have a TV for an extended period of time. And I got so much stuff done not having a TV and sitting in front of it. And just more recently with the whole Facebook and internet thing, Instagram, that type of thing, it's all got to the point where it can be very distracting. And I found that for me, really studying topics and getting into them in a way that distracts me from being distracted, as it were. So yeah, it just seemed highly appropriate to take on that tagline of don't sit there bored, meaning don't distract yourself with Facebook and things like that. Actually do something meaningful, be curious, and go and educate yourself and better yourself.
Perfect. I love it. It kind of goes along when you tag it with bushcraft to something that I've taught for years that, and it's not original, but I love the idea. It's impossible to be in the woods and in a bad mood at the same time.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, there's nothing like green spaces for making you smile.
Well, I know that your love of outdoors started at a pretty early age. In your About section on your website, you talked about being influenced by books like Tarzan by Burroughs or
Mm,
Anthony Greenback's Survival for Young People. I think you
mm.
even listed there the SAS handbook. That's
Yeah, yeah, Dr. Wiseman. Yeah,
that's
yeah,
pretty heady stuff for a young guy. How did
yeah.
all of those add to your growing in interest with bushcraft?
Oh, it's been a lifelong interest as you've taken from that. It started as a child, but I think on reflection, looking back at it, what now seems abnormal to see children playing outside and in woodlands and in I guess waste ground spaces and things like that. When I was young, back in the sort of early 80s, mid 80s, it was normal. That's what we did. We didn't sit in front of the TV. I mean, I'm showing my age now, but I'm even of a time in the UK when we only had 3 channels of TV, and some of those channels weren't on during the day. That's how far back I go. So it was really normal that we went out and we played outside with our mates, and we went to those wild spaces and we built dens and camps. And as we got a little bit older, we started making campfires and things like that. It's that then developed into, I always had a real interest in nature and animals, and all the wildlife programs on the TV, couldn't get enough of those, and that just developed into a love of the outside.
You talked about your father introducing you to those books. Did he have an interest in outdoors and bushcraft?
He did. He had been in the military, and he had done a lot of traveling in the military, and he had that background. And we used to go, our family holidays used to be camping holidays. So it was always an under canvas type holiday in that regard. But not in the way that we would call it bushcraft in this day and age. It was a little bit more, it was more of a family holiday type environment. But yeah, I mean, my dad introduced me to carving, for example, and
Hmm.
things like that.
Sounds like we have very similar backgrounds, even in when we were coming of age in this. And of course, you and I have a similar story in our middle age. We both experienced some broadening of both our waistlines and our interest in the outdoors. And we also turned to some of the same instructors. Paul Kirtley, of course, I haven't studied with him, but I've known of him. I've read his stuff, and of course, we have mutual affiliation with Creek Stewart. How did you finally decide to start the Bushcraft Survival Academy?
Yeah, well, the two things are linked, to be honest. Again, a bit of a long story here, perhaps, but I lost that connection with nature over time. As you do, as you're growing up, you get a family, you get busy, your career progresses with work, you get very involved, you do a lot of traveling with work and those type of things, and getting outside and doing the things you enjoy doing tends to take a back seat to those activities. And as part of that, certainly in the latter years, I was spending more and more time in cars and behind a desk, and still eating like I was doing long days outside, and lots of martial arts and lots of physical activity. And I put on, over a sort of 5-year period, I put on about 50 pounds. And then in the last 5 years, I put on another 50 or 60 pounds. And it reached the point where I really just couldn't do the things that I wanted to do. So around 10 years ago now, I made the conscious decision that I needed to reappraise my lifestyle and start actively looking after me, rather than worrying about my career and dedicating myself to that in the way that I had been. So I wanted to reintroduce being in the outdoors as part of that, looking after me. So went through a whole activity of going to training courses to learn bushcraft and survival skills, along with many different associated subjects like tree and plant identification with Paul Kirtley, which I can't recommend enough. And many other instructors, flint knapping, all those good things. Culminated this knowledge, and alongside my corporate job, I'd really learned that I had this passion for mentoring and teaching people. So it seemed a natural translation of taking all that skills and knowledge, once I'd become confident with it and was using it on a daily basis, and going, okay, it's time that I started giving back to the industry and providing that knowledge back. So now I'm trying to pass the knowledge on, and I'm trying to give skills to people who don't have them, or to encourage people to get off the couch and get into the outdoors. And over that period, I've lost about 110 pounds. So if I can do it, anyone can do it.
Wow, I would have never picked you for having been that large.
Yeah, so in UK terms, I was a shade under 20 stone, which is try and put that in American. It was 123 kilos, so that's 200 and I've got it here, 270 pounds, and I'm 5'8", so I was quite large. And what really did it for me in terms of the weight loss was for my 50th birthday, that was a couple of years ago, I had planned an expedition to Canada, a canoeing expedition with Paul Kirtley, actually. And I had gone on one of his expedition canoeing skill courses the year before in preparation to going to Canada. And that was a week-long course that was really informative, and I learned a lot from it. But I'll be honest, I really struggled in it. So that was the real trigger for me to say, okay, I've got to get my mobility back, I've got to get my health back, and I really worked hard to get the weight down and get back to the point where I can actually do the things that I want to do, and that's no longer a controlling factor. So
That's fantastic. I love that idea of you didn't feel that you had to get into shape to start. You started to get into shape. And I think that's a great message for a lot of people who might be thinking, wow, I'd really like to try that, but I need to get myself into shape first. No, it actually can become, the means and the ends in itself.
yes, most definitely. I mean, one of the other expeditions that I've got notionally planned for the future is a long walking journey, something like the Pacific Crest or the Great Divide or something like that. And again, the fitness aspect of that didn't really worry me, because I figured if I wasn't fit by the start of it, I certainly would be by the end of it. So yeah, absolutely. I would encourage anyone who's at all doubting it to try not to let their health considerations get in the way, and at least start to do something. And with the diversity of the bushcraft subject, there is always something that you can do.
Well, I'll tell you, nothing against Pacific Crest or the Continental Divide, but we've got a handy little trail over here on the east coast of the U.S. that I've been wanting to do. So if you want to go for a long walk, I'll do it with you.
Fab, that sounds like a plan. As
Yeah.
long as there's no snakes, though. I don't do snakes.
Oh, well, we won't do it down here in Florida then. Here in Florida, we've got more than enough snakes.
Yeah, I know.
Now, you talked a little bit about your job, that you were a mechanical engineer in the UK defense industry. Is that right?
Yep, that's right. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I've had a really interesting and varied career. I've worked on a number of so my background is research and development and design, and I've worked on a number of really interesting projects, including military vehicles and most weapon systems, from small arms up to the really big stuff. So yeah. But again, as you can imagine, as you progress through your career, it gets less about making things go bang and blowing things up, and more about managing people and doing spreadsheets with numbers on and that type of thing. And one of the things that bushcraft has allowed me to do is get back to that hands-on feeling of the actually having something tangible that you can look at and go, I've made that at the end of the day.
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you're also pretty well traveled. Did that come through your job, or did you do that more as adventure and vacation?
A little bit of both, but mainly through the work. So again, had some really fortunate opportunities there. I've been to the Middle East, places like Israel. I've been to Africa. I've been to South Africa. I've been to Australia. I've been to the Nordic countries. It's been a really good opportunity, and I've always tried to find ways to do a bit of exploring and meet people that I can learn from whilst I'm on those things. So, for example, in Australia, I did the Great Ocean Road, which is a road that stretches from Melbourne along the south coast of that part of Australia. And in a weekend, which was the time I had between the business meetings that I was there to do, I did about 2,500 kilometers of traveling in a car to see the countryside and experience some of the sights. And, you know, I went to a tropical rainforest, and I went to a bit of arid bushland, and I did the coastline. And it was, yeah, really try to make the most of these experiences. And again, when I was in South Africa, I ended up at a place called Pilanesberg, which is not far from Pretoria. Well, relatively not far from Pretoria. And Pilanesberg is fascinating. It's an extinct volcano. So there's a ring of mountains, and inside the ring of mountains is a game preserve. And it's very well guarded to stop the poaching going on. And yeah, I spent time there actually on safari around the animals, and had some really cool experiences there with the big animals.
Well, I'm glad that you're bringing all of that experience to this discussion, because the idea here, and we've discussed this, that it really should be kind of like we're comparing notes. We're getting to hear from people who have a broad range of experiences, but also look specifically at where they may have some expertise. I'm really fond of the phrase, rather than saying, you know, jack of all trades, master of none. I really like jack of all trades, master of one. Get one down, but also have, you know, some breadth to it. So here are our rules of engagement for the discussion. I've asked you to consider one tool each in 5 categories that you would want in your bushcraft survival gear if you could only have one of each category for the rest of your life. We'll assume that it lasts forever and you get to choose, all right, I get one of these. These aren't necessarily tools that you would have in your bug out bag or everyday carry, and they're not necessarily your favorites. But within each category, I'm going to give you leeway to choose any tool that you feel fits into that category. And the categories for cutting tools are: 1, a folding pocket knife; 2, small fixed blade knife, such as a neck knife, or it could be a small belt knife; 3, a large fixed blade knife, such as a bushcraft knife; 4, an axe, hatchet, or tomahawk, something that you use specifically for chopping; and then some type of saw. Then, and this actually came from our discussion going through this, when I given you my list and asked you to look at it, and you thought, hey, you may have left some out. So I've decided we'll add one wildcard tool, which is a polite way for you to say, hey, Joe, do you even bushcraft? That's a boneheaded list of categories. Here's something that you forgot. Or you can add an additional tool into any of the categories. If there are 2 folders that you would like to put in there, you're welcome to do that in your wild card. And then finally, we'll get into the why behind the what. That's an important part of, you know, the tools. I think a lot of people make their mistake in buying a tool and thinking the tool does the work. But if, you know, feel free to explain a little bit why you selected it. You can even expand a little bit on questions about grind. I know from your writing, you're not particularly a fan of the Scandi grind. You're not against it, but
I'm not against it. No,
but you're not really for it.
No. I think it's become very fashionable in the bushcraft industry in the last, I'll go so far as 10 years, the last 10 years, and it's almost reached the point where to be a bushcraft knife, it has to have a Scandi grind, and people just don't realise that most of the time that's not appropriate for the task you want the knife to do. And I'm a firm believer that you choose the right tool for doing the right job, and if the tool's designed properly for that job, it will aid you in doing it. If it's not, then it won't. So yeah,
well, I'll confess, you stretched me a little bit with that one. When I read that in your writings, I kind of like went,
Were you a follower of fashion, Joe?
Yeah, yeah, I'm a fashionista. But no, I thought your rationale and your reasoning for it was really sound. So in this is your chance. If you want to pull out your soapbox, for sure, get that. And of course, we'll talk about like some tools that might be good for multitasking and ergonomics. Yep. I'll do my best to include links for any of our viewers to purchase any of the tools you recommend. And please don't be afraid to list any of your own merchandise. We're not above self-aggrandizement here and promoting ourselves. But I may push back a little bit on it if you chose it because it's yours or you chose it because you really think it's the best tool. So if you're ready, do you want to get to it?
Yeah, for sure. And you're safe in that regard because I've deliberately chosen stuff that is commercially available and readily, widely available, and also in the majority of cases, things that are suitable for beginners to use.
Excellent. Very good. All right. Your EDC or pocket knife, what'd you go with?
Okay. So the good old Victorinox Swiss Army knife. You can't beat it. This model is the Huntsman. I carry one on my belt as my everyday carry, if you like. I also have one in my belt pouch, which is my pseudo survival kit, just as a backup to the knives that I would normally carry. And I also keep one in a rucksack or a haversack, depending on where I'm going, my day bag. I always have one of these. One of the driving reasons for that, in the UK, we have some quite strict knife laws, and to carry a knife without a legitimate and good reason for having it that you can defend in a court of law, the only ones that we're allowed to carry on a daily basis have to have less than a 3-inch blade, and they can't be lock knives or fixed blade knives. So they have to be like a slip joint or a friction folder. So the Swiss Army range of knives, most of them fit within that category, because they're mainly slip joints, although these days you can get ones with locking blades. And the Huntsman specifically, I chose it because it has a pair of scissors on it. So things like trimming your nail, if you get a hang nail or something like that, which can be quite painful. If you know, in a survival type situation, if you have to stitch yourself or something like that, cutting, stitching, that type of thing. Just in craft projects like trimming the ends of piece of cordage, or if you're doing basketry or something like that, trimming the ends of things with a little pair of scissors is often a lot neater than trying to cut it with a knife. It's also got a small saw on it. So, you know, if you need a small saw, you can cut down reasonable sized pieces of material with the Swiss Army knife, probably up to the size that you could make a shelter with, especially if you were doing something like a Kahansky super shelter without any problems at all. It's got, you know, a big general purpose blade, a small, more detailed blade on it, and as a bonus, it's got a couple of screwdriver bits. So, you know, it is the multi-tool of its age, whilst it's still not that heavy, and you can lose it in a pocket or lose it on a little belt pouch without too many problems at all. And you know, on a daily basis I carry a black one, but all of the ones that I've got in my survival type gear are all red ones, so that if I drop them on the floor or sit them down, they're a lot easier to find. My personal preference would be not to have one of the camo ones, because why would you want to lose it if you sit it down? Yeah.
Right, for sure. Now, do you have the Huntsman style in for all three that you mentioned for your
Yeah,
haversack?
yeah. Yeah, over the years, I've had quite a number of Victorinox ones, right from the very small ones that you can put on a key ring up to the big chunky one with the magnifying glass and all of those. And this is the size that I've settled on as the most bang for the buck, to use that phrase.
Right, right. Now, excuse my ignorance here, but do you have multi-tools like the Leatherman there in the UK?
Yeah, we do. I'm reaching into my box of sharp things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so somewhere here. There we go. So I do have a Leatherman. The issues that we have with this, and they are popular, don't get me wrong, along with the Gerbers and the other similar products that are out there, generally speaking, the blades on them tend to lock. So
Okay.
most people will carry these on their belt in complete ignorance, not realizing they're actually opening themselves up to criminal conviction if they happen to get in an altercation with a policeman who's less than sympathetic to them. So I used to carry a Leatherman for years until I got to the point where I realized that I was committing an offence by doing it. And if I am away on a specific expedition where I've got that legal excuse for having it that I can defend in a court of law, I will happily carry one. The other downside of them for me is they tend to start getting quite weighty.
Right.
And especially when you're into the bigger models, I think I've got one of the EOD or the Mutt, I think it's called. It's actually quite a heavy tool to carry around on your belt for an extended period of time. So again, you know, there's real utility in having things like the pliers on these. They can be invaluable in some situations, but as a general tool for the kind of purposes we're talking about, do you need it? Is it right for the purpose that you want? And again, I'll come back to my little soapbox about fashionable items. They have, to a degree, come fashionable over the years, and a lot of people carry them and never use them for anything other than opening a cardboard box.
Yep. Well, and you hit on one of the things that came to my mind and why I asked was that locking blade with the
Mm.
restrictions that you have there. And then, of course, I think it's a strong argument for the weight of the the Leatherman or the Gerbers. I'm a fan of them. I have them, but I don't see myself ever carrying one of those as an everyday carry or as a pocket knife. It's just too beefy.
No, I concur entirely. I mean, at one time in the job when I had a hands-on role and was taking things to bits and putting them back together again, it was useful in that role, and I had it with me all the time. But you're right, just to walk around the streets, personally, I wouldn't carry one because I think it's just too heavy and chunky. And again, just to throw a bit of experience out there, I've had both Gerbers and Leathermans over time, and my preference is for a Leatherman. I've had a few issues with Gerbers. They've been a bit variable in quality for me. So yeah, I would personally go to the Leatherman route if I had a choice.
Mhm. Excellent, good stuff. All right, your small fixed blade knife.
Yeah, okay. So for that, I'm going to go a bit Scandinavian, a little bit traditional, and this one does have a Scandi grind on it. So this is the Moira #2, I believe this one is. It's got a relatively short blade. It's about 80 or 90 millimeters, so about 4 inches long. And as a neck knife, this will do most of the tasks that I want it to do. My preference would have been that it had a more traditional Scandi grind on it rather than the more modern Scandi grind on it. But eventually I will get to the point where I make one for myself that's how I want it. So a good high utility knife. I mean, you know, there's the theory of 1 is none and 2 is 1, if we follow that theory. So we would have this as a backup to our main belt knife. And I'm a believer also of trying not to duplicate the capability too heavily. So for me, a neck knife is an opportunity to carry a capability that you struggle with your belt knife.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, so I personally would have something different on my neck than I would have on my belt, just so that I can do a task easier with one over the other. If
Now,
that makes sense.
mentioning the grind, do you modify the grinds of your knives at all?
Yes, I do. I do. So there are a number of knives that I have a preference for. Just over the years, my preferred standard of grind is what I believe in the US used to be called the meringue grind. I don't know if that's still a popular phrase.
Hmm.
So it would be what I would define as a high Scandi grind. So it's got flat sides that come down almost to a point, and then it's got a secondary bevel right at the end where the cutting edge is, and that would be a convex, get it the right way round. Yeah, convex bevel on it. I like convex bevels because if they're correctly profiled, they can be incredibly sharp, shaving sharp, and they can be kept that way. But they're also very robust. They've got a lot of they're sort of I'm not making the shape very well. It's like the shape of a Spitzer rifle bullet, if you're familiar with that. And this area in here leaves a lot of meat behind the edge. That means the edge is robust compared to one where you've just ground it down flat like that. So yeah, personally, that is my preferred standard. And in Scandi grinds specifically, the modern trend is to have a Scandi grind of about a 30-degree inclusive angle, which is actually quite a steep grind. When you look historically, they tended to be 17 to 22 degrees, which is a lot more in line with the kind of grind you would get on a kitchen knife.
Right.
So traditionally, the Scandi grind blades were made up term a lot more slicey than the modern day ones are with that newer grind. So this is where the nuances come into my love-hate relationship with Scandi grinds. Is I think in some applications they can be really good, but in other applications they're not really designed for that kind of job, and that they do it, but they don't do it as good as something that would be designed for it. And with a modern Scandi grind, slicing is one of the things it really struggles at. It tends just to wedge things apart and break them. So if you're slicing a tomato or a carrot or something like that, you're squashing it or wedging it apart, and it'll a carrot in particular, if you do that, it will start cutting and then it will fracture and break apart. Whereas if you've got like a kitchen knife with a similar grind, it will with the shallower grind, it will slice all the way through rather than wedge and fracture it.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, because sometimes, when I have students, they'll have their knives. I'll ask them if they're slicing it or bludgeoning it into slices.
Yeah. And the answer is both. Yes.
Yes, it is. All right, your large fixed blade knife.
Okay, my current favorite, and again, I'm a firm believer in changing your mind as time goes by. We're all learning, and very much so. I genuinely don't consider myself an expert in any of this. I just have learned what I've learned as the years have gone by. So currently, I'm favouring the slightly dirty Falkneven F1, which
Aha,
is
nice.
yeah, it's a fully convex ground blade, which makes the blade quite thick at the spine here. So it will do tasks like battening quite well. It's got that nice shape that I prefer, which allows for a really fine edge that's razor sharp on it, but it's also a robust edge. I haven't yet managed to damage the edge at all, and just a few strops on a belt with a little bit of compound on it, and I can keep this razor sharp. Tactilely, when I first looked at it and got it, I didn't think the square grip would suit my hand. I don't tend to favour sort of rectangular type. If I hold it there, perhaps you can see it against the background. It's got quite a rectangular grip, similar to some of the earlier SE knives. But actually, because of the nature of the material that they've made the grip from, it's actually quite comfortable in the hand. It's got a little bit of compliance, a little bit of squidginess in the grip that makes it quite comfortable to use. The shape of it itself allows a multitude of different grips without discomfort, and it's designed for use in cold weather, so the grip actually goes all the way around the tang. But by definition, it is a full-length tang. You can see, if I hold it about there against my beard, you can see the tang sticks out the back of the handle here. So it's only actually the I don't know, less than an eighth of an inch at the top and the bottom that's covered by the rubber type material, and that obviously makes the knife very robust for use in harsh environments. You don't want a knife that has the potential to break if you're relying on it on those environments. So this knife was specifically designed for one of the Nordic Air Forces as their survival knife. And so far, I've been using it consistently for about a year now. I've not found anything it won't do for me moderately well. So I'm really happy with this as a knife at the moment.
Now, for both of those knives, how do the spines do for a spark on a ferro rod? Did you have to modify it at all?
No, this one is razor sharp on the edges. It's designed deliberately that way for exactly that purpose. And it's not just for ferro rods, as I know you're aware, Joe, but for the audience that's out there, there are other things in bushcraft that we would need to scrape. So, you
Right.
know, for example, we want to scrape the bark off of a twig so that we can use the twig to hold food over a fire like a kebab. We don't want the bacteria on the bark, so we can use the back of the spine of the knife to scrape the bark off, as an example. So this one is designed specifically to do that, but they've actually done it in such a way that if you're doing a reinforced grip with your thumb on the blade to get some control whilst you're carving, it's actually really comfortable to do that, and it doesn't make your thumb sore because there isn't a burr on either side,
Hmm.
but it is sharp, deliberately sharp to facilitate that scraping action. The Moira, um, we're in different price brackets there. It's been a while since I've looked at the price of these. I think, forgive me, I don't know the US dollars number. They're about 120 UK pounds, if I remember correctly, whereas this knife is in the region of 15 to 20 UK pounds. So, you know, in terms of quality of manufacture, they're in different brackets. And that means that there's absolutely nothing wrong with this knife for what it is, but the blade is stamped out rather than being precision ground like that blade. You won't pick it up on the screen, unfortunately. I can't get the detail there, but the edge along here is just where the stamping's been done. It's not been dressed back in any particular way other than to make it smooth. So unless I ground that down to get that 90-degree spine, I wouldn't be able to do the scraping action anywhere else other than at the very, try and get it there, at the very tip here, where the Scandi grind comes up and round, where it's sharpened, there is a sharp edge just on the tip there. So that is actually enough to use a ferro rod by scraping on the end like that. But if you're doing those other scraping tasks that I described, this knife struggles with that without modification.
Now, yeah, I'm going to take a bit of a pause here and going through the list because you reminded me of something that was in your buyer's guide that I really liked. I'm gonna paraphrase. I know this isn't exactly how you said it, but you know, some people when they're just getting into it, I think they get hung up on how much they spend for their tools, and the knife you have is better than the knife you don't have.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something about, you know, spend what you need to spend, but don't hesitate getting into bushcraft if you can't buy the biggest, most expensive knife.
Yeah, 100%. So, you know, I'm talking from the context of having 10 years experience, both learning bushcraft and transitioning into becoming a bushcraft instructor with 4 or 5 years face-to-face experience on that now. Um, as an absolute beginner, excuse me, I completely discourage people from going out and spending $200-300 on a knife because you genuinely don't know how to use it properly. You don't know how to care for it. You don't know how to sharpen it properly. And you don't even know if it suits your hand and suits the style of the way that you're going to use it as a person. So as with any tool, and especially something where you're manually hands-on with it, there's a bit of learning involved with it. it. So whilst everything I've said about the Scandi grind holds true, there are some advantages to it, especially when beginners are involved. That flat grind there allows you to get it on a stone nice and firmly, and with what's called really good register, which allows that sharpening action for somebody who's struggling to hold it at the right angle whilst they're sharpening it. So as a beginner's knife, whilst you're learning to sharpen, whilst you're learning how to use the knife, and whilst you're making sure that you know what you want to use it for, and the shape and style of the blade and the handle is suitable for you to use, I highly recommend something like the Mora Companion or the Halter Craftsman knife, both of which are relatively inexpensive knives. I think the Halter Craftsman knife in the UK, you can pick one up for about £6. The Mora Companion in the UK, depending on which version you go for, it's between £12 to £15. So they're relatively inexpensive for what you're getting. I use a Mora Companion as an instructor knife because it's part of the policy of the company I work with as an instructor. And again, it's done everything that I need to do it with, including battening. If you use the right battening technique, you won't damage the handle on the knife. My only reservation with it in terms of doing something like an extended wilderness expedition is that it has that stick tang in the handle, and I would just be a bit nervous of it as my only knife, that if that handle broke, it would leave me in a bit of a situation that I wouldn't be happy with. So personally, I would be happier with a fixed tang knife. And then if we're talking the Mora range of knives, then perhaps we're looking at something like Garberg that has the full tang in a similar fashion to the F1. I can praise the Mora range. Every one of them that I've had, I had a Bushcraft Black for a number of years. That was an excellent knife. It's like the big brother of the Mora Companion. I just, for everyday use or use in adverse environments, my preference would be for that full tang with that really robust transition from the blade to the handle, so that you're certain that unless you do something absolutely stupid, it's not going to fail on you.
Right. And you bring up a great point with, for beginners, those knives. I'll be asked very often how I learned to sharpen my knives. And I said, because I bought knives that weren't good enough to hold an edge. And it's just having to sharpen them all the time. So I understand exactly what you're saying there with that idea. And also, with the full tang, but we do the same. We use the Moras for training, and I think they're dynamite. I bought them for training with the idea that they could be disposable, and I've never had to dispose of one.
No. I in the experience that I've had as an instructor, I've never yet seen one fail. I've seen reports of some that have failed. I mean, Paul Kirtley's got a blog on his website about exactly that topic. And generally speaking, I haven't got one, I didn't bring one up with me, but generally speaking, when you're battening, you should be hitting on this part of the blade here, not this part of the handle here. And generally on a stick tang knife, when you break it, it's because you're hitting it here, which is putting a lot of force into this part of the blade here, where the transition goes from being like that to like that. So there's a natural reduction in material and a natural stress razor there. And as soon as you bend it like that, there's a tendency for it to start cracking and splitting. So yeah, I like I say, in their price bracket and for an absolute beginner, 100% they would be my recommendation, something out of that range. Sharpening starts with blunting, and you don't want to be blunting a $300 pattern welded knife with a carbon fiber handle or something like that. Yeah.
Right. But hey, if I list one in my Amazon affiliate links, by all means, go ahead and buy one.
Yeah, please.
Well, this is a good segue, seeing as we're kind of into chopping. How about your axe, hatchet, or tomahawk? What'd you choose there?
Yeah, this was a difficult choice. I've got a few axes, as you might imagine. So, recognizing that an axe is actually a dangerous tool, and it's certainly not something that I would suggest for a beginner going off and learning for themselves. And again, anecdote, and I'm going to reach into my box of sharp things again. So this little jobby was one of the first axes I got as a little camping axe here. It's got a Scandi grind on it, believe it or not, and it almost took off that index finger. So I was splitting kindling many years ago now in a completely inappropriate fashion, holding the piece of kindling, axe on the top, tapping down like that. It had a bit of adverse grain on it, and out it came on there. And fortunately enough, I hadn't put as much force into it as I usually would have. I ended up in hospital with a couple of stitches, and fortunately I've still got full movement of my finger. So axes are not to be messed with, and the shorter the handle on an axe, the more dangerous they are, because the closer you are to them, and as you swing them, the closer they are to bits of your body that you rather they wouldn't interact with. So generally speaking, the recommendation would be for a long-handled axe. But my recommendation, based on where I am in my journey in bushcraft at the moment, is this axe here, which is the outdoor axe from Granford's Brooks. So it's almost a tomahawk. I can't remember the exact specs, but I believe the head on it is a 1 pound head. So I've had this for a number of years now, to the point where it's almost the only axe that I use, unless I've got a job to do where I'm taking down a major sized tree. So I've taken trees down maybe 4 or 5 inches in diameter using that little hatchet sized axe. You can do it. It was designed such that it's quite thick in this section here, so it's thin in this area here. It's actually almost concave in this area, or parallel, and then it wedges out here. So not only does it make it a really good carving axe, it's really good at splitting things, because the wedge in this portion here, once the blade is into it, it forces the material apart. So it's excellent for kindling and that type of thing. And also, being relatively light, I put that in my day pack and it disappears, and I don't even notice I'm carrying it, and I you know, it's there. So that's my recommendation for an axe, Granford's Brooks outdoor axe.
Now, that handle looks like it might be about 14 to 16 inches.
Yes, I would agree. Yep. Yep.
Right. Yeah, I like that handle length. I actually do a Norland that has a 12-inch handle on it, that I carry a lot. But I like what you're saying about that longer handle for some of those beginners. It's counterintuitive to a lot of them. They think it's harder to handle, but I actually think it's easier to handle
Yes.
those longer ones when you get to that maybe 16 inches or so.
And I've also noticed again, and this is a personal thing, and I don't really have the science in it, but that's straight handled, quite like a tomahawk handle, compared to some of the quite curved handles, especially some of the carving axes out there that can have really curved handles associated with them. And I find that the straight handle can give you quite a lot of leverage on it, and you can put a lot of power into it and do a lot of work with this, compared to a similar axe that's got a different shape handle.
Right. Yeah. When you first brought it out and I saw the handle at first, I thought you were going for a tomahawk there. And
Yeah.
I like that idea that you have the control you can get from that straight handle.
Yes, it's very good. There's a lot of utility in that.
All right. Next up, how about your saw?
Saw again. So I'm going a bit off mainstream here. So the mainstream would be the Backhoe Laplander, and again, it's a saw that I use regularly as the.
You're ripping my heart out again.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. My personal saw is a Silky Pocket Boy. This
Right.
is the 170, which means the blade's 170 millimeters long. Um, so they have a little bit of a bad reputation because if you get a little bit excited with them when you're sawing and you put a bit too much power and a bit too much energy into them, you can bend the end and they have a habit of the tip snapping off. My view, that's because people aren't using them properly. One of my experiences is that people tend to try to push a saw through
Hmm.
pieces of wood by putting a lot of energy into it, and basically you just need to pull the saw backwards and forwards and let the weight of it and the motion of it do the cutting, and the saw will pull itself through the wood. So if you're pushing really hard and you come slightly out the slot and push it back in and then you bend that and snap, that's on you, not on the saw. But of course, people, I've seen reviews where they're blaming the heat treatment of the blade and all sorts of things, even the little finger hole in there for creating a stress razor. They're all contributing factors, but you can't get away from most people are just far too aggressive in using a saw. So the reason why I chose this over the Laplander, it has a different pattern of teeth in here, and I chose it mainly for craft purposes. It gives a lot smoother cut when you're using it to cut something on a craft project, and it also, because of the aggressiveness of the cut on there, it cuts a lot quicker as well, with the caveat that you have
Hmm.
got to just take it gently when you're doing it. So yeah, I have nothing against the Baco Laplander. I use one regularly. It's a good tool, but my personal preference is for the Silky Pocket Boy.
Yeah, well, you cannot argue with how Silky's cut. Um,
No, no, I
but
mean they're in the arborealist industry. It's the chosen saw.
mhm. Well, okay, you've ruined Scandi Grind for me. You've ruined
Yep,
Laplanders for me.
yep.
I'm kind of afraid to go to the wild card now because you just might ruin my life. But go ahead. What's your wild card? What did I miss, or what would you like to add?
Okay, and I've got to unwrap this one a little bit because it's got protected cover on it. But so if we consider, whilst I'm doing that, if we consider what we use a knife for, so we use a knife for slicing, we use a knife for planing actions, so going along the grain of the wood. We use a knife for cutting across the grain of wood, like battening and that type of action. And we use a knife for scraping, like we've described. The one thing that we haven't talked about really is making a hollow in a piece of wood, such as the
Hmm.
bowl of the spoon or the divot in a hearth for a bow drill set. So you can do all of those things using a knife with a profile similar to this one here, where you've got that belly at the front near the tip. You can get in there and you can create a cavity with it, but it is a bit traumatic and a bit tedious doing it. It takes a long time to, and certainly if you want to get a good finish with it. So my wild card is a form of crook knife, the Indian crook knife or Mokatogan. Yeah,
Hmm.
and the reason why I've chosen this over just a spoon knife, yeah, so I had a sort of a more circular shaped spoon knife, which is my favorite carving spoon knife. The reason I've gone for the Mokatogan over that one is this combines a straight blade for the planing portion of it with a curved blade for doing those concave activities. So you can cut with it, you can create scooping out actions with it, and it's a facilitator that allows you to do some of the things that the other knives struggle to do far more easily.
Hmm. I like that addition, and I like the Makatagans because the leverage I can get with that motion. I can be much more precise while still having some power behind it.
Power, yes, yeah, and it's a different motion with the arm. If you think about the way that you would normally carve with a knife or with your fingers, you're actually pulling, which is quite a strong motion.
Right. Well, good. I don't feel as bad about myself now that the wild card didn't like just blow up my whole universe. Um,
Uh,
Well, hey, thanks. That was a bunch of fun. I hope you enjoyed it.
Oh yeah, it's been a really good chat. Thank you.
Well, before we go, where can people go to learn more about you and your work and the Bushcraft Survival Academy?
Fab. It's www.bushcraftsurvivalacademy.com is the URL for my website. My work is aimed at beginners. I'm really trying to encourage people to get off the couch and get in the outdoors, as I said earlier. So I'm trying to offer advice and information and courses, online courses for people to give them the knowledge and confidence to make that transition in their life. So that's where you can find me.
And I'll make sure to have that URL in the comments. And I know that on your site, you can get that buyer's guide just by going to the site, and it's free. So I'll make sure
Yeah,
to reference
perfect.
that.
Yep. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Yeah, and for viewers, I'm telling you, check out Brian's site, especially this buyer's guide. It was dynamite. I thought I knew knives, and then I learned some stuff, so I appreciate it. Anything else before we go?
I'm just glad that I've bent your worldview.
You have. You've challenged me. I'm going to have to go and sit and think for a while. Well, hey, thanks. I appreciate it, and we're going to have you on for another one of these someday. After we do a few more of these, we have some other five to survives that are coming up that I think you have some great insights. Thanks again, Brian. Have a joy to the rest of your day, all right?
Thank you. You too, Joe. Appreciate it.